as soon as I, got into LSAT land, I just fell in love with it. It was such a relief. It made me feel like just intellectually awake in a way I had never felt. It was like finally there was a thing that was hard enough that I could
Mhm.
never gist it. I could never half pay attention. I had to give it everything that I had. And it was so perfect and rewarding in how.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everyone, so happy to have with us today Ellen Cassidy. She's the CEO and founder of Elemental Prep. They are an online Hogwarts for LSAT. Love that description. Ellen's going to tell us all about it and how we can maybe even read a little better. And she's also the author of Loophole. It's an LSAT logical reasoning book, #1 selling guide on Amazon with $0 in marketing spend. Super, super impressive. She's also the #1 LSAT teacher in the world by revenue, y'all. We're so lucky to have her here. How did Ellen get on this journey? So sounds like she impulsively bought an LSAT prep book after she was at a party and talked to some lawyer who told her some fun, interesting stories. Loved prepping for the exam, felt like her brain ramped up to the 70% to 100% capacity and just wished she could do the LSAT forever. Man, you are so special. I remember studying for the MCAT, Ellen, and I wish I had you back then. So she got into Harvard Law, deferred 3 times, and was helping students through the stress of studying for the exam. Founded Elemental Prep to teach folks to read and critically analyze information and formalize her teaching curriculum. And boom, found a way to do the LSAT forever. Not only is she so cool professionally, but she's also got a very fascinating personal story, which we'll invite her to share. She's on a mission to show everyone that ceilings are imaginary. And then on top of that, she's just such a cool girl. I love her. She lives in Austin. I love hanging out with her. And so I'm glad for y'all to get to know her today. Welcome, Ellen, to the show.
Thank you. Oh man, I should have you introduce me wherever I go.
I'm here. Just call me. I'm ready. So stoked to get to dive in with you. I know I just gave a bit of an intro, but I always want to give the opportunity for you to tell folks in your own words, who is Ellen?
Yeah. Well, I'll start at the beginning. So I think I had a bit of an unlikely trajectory, or what folks might think is unlikely, but actually probably isn't as unlikely as one might think.
Yeah.
That my upbringing, I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia, or originally Western Pennsylvania before that, but then my formative years in Northeast Philly, and my upbringing was really characterized by like hard drugs and addiction and things like that in my household. That I grew up being, a 7-year-old at an NA meeting. Like, this is not great for that kind of kid. And, my mom had a heroin addiction that eventually caused her to, leave my household when I was 11 and then only show up really very intermittently or chaotically, throughout my teenage years, and then eventually overdosed, on heroin when I was in my early 20s. And like, I like, bringing these stories up because it does relate to the whole ceilings or imaginary
Hmm.
situation. I have a half sister who has had, a similar relationship with drugs and who has fallen into criminal situations and things like that. And it's very important to me to be a living example that where you come from is not where you're going,
Yeah.
and that you have control of your own destiny even when people tell you you don't, that you get to make that decision. um so yeah, that's a little bit of
How
background.
that is really inspiring. How were you able to take that agency for yourself, for your own story growing up?
I mean, I felt like I didn't really have like a choice.
Mhm.
I think when I was very, very little, I was like fascinated by academic learning. I think it's because I probably got a lot of good feedback of like, you're good at this, over and over. And I developed a like positive relationship with testing from a very young age, because like when your life is very chaotic, but you always see 99th percentile, 99th percentile, 99th percentile over and over again. I think it functions as like this kind of comfort that it's like, but I'm special. I can do it. And I will always remember when I was in 3rd grade, I went up to a librarian with a college book and said, "Which one's the best and the farthest away?" And she said, "Stanford." And I said, "That's where I'm going." And she was like, "Okay, little girl." But, like, I really did believe that, like, wholeheartedly. That's like, that's what I am going to do. And then, I got expelled from high school at the end of my junior year of high school for
Okay.
starting a gay prom. And so definitely upset the apple cart in terms of, the laser sharp trajectory to Stanford undergrad.
That's so fascinating because to me that's like shows such original thinking. I'm like, how do we reward you for starting this?
See, and when you aren't in the Northeast Philly echo chamber, or I guess I didn't live in Northeast Philly, the Philadelphia area echo chamber, then, that becomes obvious. But at the time, everybody I knew was like, wow, you really screwed up. This
Wow.
is very bad. And it was only I had a friend's dad who I didn't even know who was like, oh, this is great for her. But it was like some rumor I heard that a dad said this. And so it's
Mhm.
like, ooh, maybe a glimmer of hope. And, still applied and did get in and, everything worked out. But I mean, I thought I had really, really
Yeah.
messed it up.
Yeah.
And so it felt like being, rescued off the brink of defeat.
Yeah. So, but coming back to the time when you were growing up in this environment, I
Mhm.
guess paint a picture for me of maybe so you felt like you had no choice and you really latched onto because school because you were good at school. Were there any other support systems or just systems, people you had in place? No,
Um,
not at
I
all.
I I mean, it's not like I was, growing up on the sidewalk in a cardboard box or something. Like,
Mhm,
obviously, like, I raised by a single father who, was
mhm,
there for me. And but I would say in terms of, like, go-getterness and emotional support, direction, and all of that, that was very much internally derived.
mhm,
That I I always say that there's, one person who ever found me and was like, "I'm gonna help her," and that's Dave Kaloran, who's my mentor, who owns a big LSAT test prep company, named PowerScore. And when I found the LSAT, after I found the LSAT, we developed like a friendship, and he's now been my mentor for over 10 years. And that relationship, it means so much to me because it felt like the first time in my life. And I met Dave when I was, in my early 20s or something like that, or mid 20s. And when somebody actually was like, no, I'm going to help her, and I'm going to give to her and pour into her. And it felt like that, like, once in a lifetime chance that I felt like I always missed out on, of like that, interested older person who's gonna like
yeah,
show you the ropes. And I think finding that with Dave when I was in my 20s really showed me how much I did not have it
yeah,
in other environments.
yeah, which again, to your point, is so cool of your origins don't need to dictate your journey or your destination at
Yeah.
all. What was it like then when you got to Stanford, the undergrad, the transition for you? How was
It was
that?
so funny because, like, I
Because
definitely
it's
felt
such an
like,
idyllic campus too, right?
oh, yeah.
It looks like paradise.
I definitely thought, like, this is me winning the lottery and, like, me, the beginning of my, like, victory lap around life, very
Mhm,
silly ideas. But I I remember when I got there, that was when I was kind of introduced to the concept of imposter syndrome. I remember on the first
mhm.
day of orientation, we were all, like, in, some big speech environment, and I'm sitting there and somebody was like, "And you probably think that you didn't, we made a mistake. You didn't deserve to be here, but we don't make mistakes. Look around." And I'm just there like, "Speak for yourself."
I
Like,
fought my way into here.
I deserve to be here. And, like, it it was this odd thing because I felt like everyone else was on, like, a very different
Different
page
page.
where they
Yeah.
were like, "Yeah, how do I really deserve it?" And I was like,
Yeah,
"Gonna
you know what I've
cut
been
off my
through?
right hand to be here." Like, it was so, like, I have to deserve it. I fought for this so hard.
Yeah.
And, like, there was definitely a bit of a cultural divide. And I think,
Mhm.
like, I went to my freshman year roommate's house at one point over Thanksgiving, and I saw that they had, like, a racquetball court, and I had, like, never seen a racquetball court.
Oh my gosh, Ellen, I so relate. Let alone in their house.
And I was like, "What?" But
Yeah.
it it was like little things that
Yeah.
just let me know that I was,
Yeah.
different, not typical. We did a game once called Crossing the Line, and it was me and one girl who had been in foster care that just kept on crossing the line of having all these experiences happen to us and everyone else not. And then
Yeah.
it's this game where it's supposed to show that everybody's together and the same and we're a community, but I actually thought it functioned to show the exact opposite.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
oh no, Ellen and this other person have very, very different lives than everyone else here. All right, now go back to your rooms. And I mean, ultimately, I don't think these things I really let them bother me that much. It was just kinda confirming something I already knew and
Yeah.
gave me, like, probably just a little bit more of a chip on my shoulder to prove myself more and more and more over and over again.
Yeah. I so really in the sense that I grew up in Sierra Leone, which is bottom 5 poorest countries in the world, and I came to the US at 16 for undergrad, but then I went to business school at Stanford. And so this was the most wealth I had ever been exposed to is when I got there. And I also remember they had a session at the beginning. Oh, darn it. I'm like forgetting, but something along the same lines of, oh yeah, um like you are also privileged. And for me, this line, I'd never heard this line before in my life, that I was like, well, I'm I'm not, like, I really don't come from much. Yes, I am now. And it took a lot of internalization. Yes, I am now very privileged to be here. This is such a great opportunity. And
Mhm.
like giving back, like there's it's kind of a shit show, like who gets in and who
Yeah.
doesn't, things like that. And that was a privilege. But that was for me also kind of like a shock to hear that, because I hadn't really associated myself with privilege much before.
Yeah.
A lot of luck in life, but yeah. And then truly, I think it took me years to become more comfortable and accustomed to the level of wealth and
Yeah.
opportunity, which I think a lot of I really find a ton of appreciation in my background, right? Like, not coming from a lot of opportunity has built so much resilience and strength and perseverance in me
Yeah.
that I wouldn't trade for anything. And then now having access to opportunities, I think, just catapults me even more.
Mhm.
And so, but it definitely took me a moment to recalibrate to this new way of being.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, Stanford campus is just so gorgeous too. It was like, whoa, it's like, what
Yeah.
dream am I waking up in every, every morning? What's happening here? But it was a beautiful time for me too.
Yeah. It's like you're living in a postcard. But, like,
Yeah.
I it's actually funny. I don't think I've ever really had a conversation with someone about this, where all
Mm.
of a sudden you're being told this word privilege that you don't really understand fully how it applies to you. And, of course, I'm not saying I'm not privileged and that I wasn't even privileged at the time. There were a lot of people who were in a lot worse situations than I
Mhm.
was, but it when you first enter that, like, hyper privileged environment, I feel like you don't
Mhm.
really understand and you're like, "Oh gosh, is there something I'm missing? Like, what who got the memo? Like, what
Right.
oh." And in a way, it's this, like, reinforcing of how different
Oh
you
my
are
god.
because you don't understand.
Exactly. I so relate, like, because I feel like there were folks who came in knowing and had some sort of agenda, and I had no idea. And I feel like I learned after graduation. I was like, "Oh, this was the agenda, I see."
Oh, right.
Um
And I think definitely now I am, of course, much more mindful and aware and am, much more privileged now than I was then.
Yeah.
Um, but like I said, I felt like I just, won the lottery, cheated
Mhm.
fate. Like I get to be here and like I'm with all these people who are, the, like best and smartest and most accomplished and all of this stuff. And it's like that sense of feeling like I got to belong.
Mhm.
Like it was like I was so high on that feeling that I got to be there. I got to
Right.
be a part of this group of people that it was like I couldn't let myself fathom that I really didn't belong because it would
Yeah.
have broken me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Totally. Totally. And also I feel like your journey there was very different from the journey that most other folks had to walk to get there too. So I don't know, like selfishly, I'm defending freshman version of Ellen, and of course she belongs. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, I definitely would have had a very different experience if I had let that voice have a
right.
conversation of
And
like,
it's
what
so
you don't.
normal. It's
Yeah.
so normal to have this voice, and I think a lot of the self-management and self-coaching is finding your inner ally to kinda talk nicely to that voice. Thank you very much, but we do belong.
Yeah.
We do deserve to be here, and just building up that relationship with that ally.
Mhm.
Okay, so getting in Stanford, eventually finding your community, feeling the sense of belonging. I want to take that into how you eventually launched Elemental Prep. What happened in between?
Oh,
Anything formative, important before we talk about Elemental? Because I have so many questions for you on your business.
yes. So I'll give the brief fast forward. So, and one caveat, I don't know that I actually did find a community at Stanford.
Okay.
I think I very much wanted to tell myself the story that
Mm-hmm.
I belonged and I like I earned this and I'm here. But I think amongst peers, I don't really think I understood the things I didn't know. I don't think I understood the social cues, the networking, like all of the soft skills I
Right.
really didn't have.
Which nobody
And
was teaching you this growing
no,
up at
and
all.
so I think I, in a way, wasted slash missed out on a lot of what I could have done in terms of community there. And so, I graduated, wonderful. I then did a year-long dramaturgy internship at the American Conservatory Theater because I thought I was going to be a
Oh,
playwright. I
very
was
cool.
very into like performing arts and things like that at the time. I'd had like an improv and acting background, and so then I started an MFA program in playwriting in New Jersey. After that year at or at the American Conservatory Theater, and at Rutgers, I dropped out after one semester after being bullied out of the
Hmm.
program.
What?
I know, who's bullied out of an MFA program? This girl.
Yeah.
Um,
Wait,
but I
what
mean,
what happened?
what did happen? I mean, I think I it's really funny because I think they stereotyped me as a very different from them privileged smart person, and they saw themselves as much more, you know, gritty, and that I was, an egomaniac or something, and they
Hmm.
had to bring me down a peg to the point where, people would, refuse to comment on my work because they didn't like me. At one point, my roommates like called the police on me, had the police come and like harass me. I mean, it was just like a
I'm
whole
so sorry.
bad situation. I mean, the head of the directing program was like, "Well, it seems like no one likes you here." I mean, it was just things that like don't seem realistic were
Mhm.
happening, and I was just so unhappy. And I look back now at all those experiences that happened at Rutgers, and I always think failure is a trampoline. That
Mhm.
as bad as Rutgers was, I am glad that it was as bad as it was
Mhm.
because it got me out of there real quick and got me off the theater path real quick.
Yeah.
And to the point where, I don't have any worries about the road less traveled at all. And so I left pretty quickly. But the other silver lining is at the time I managed to finagle my way into a part-time lecturing position in the English department during that one semester. And I really liked teaching the freshman comp class that I was teaching. And so then when I came back to Palo Alto and I was living with my boyfriend at the time, it's like, oh God, quarter life crisis. What am I going to do? And this is when, the hot tub party comes into
It
play.
happened. This is when you
Yes,
found out about the LSAT
exactly.
and
And so
law.
you have to, reach that total
Right.
nadir to
It's
be
almost like
just
right.
super desperate.
This feeling of rock bottom, yes, and I remember I had a
Exactly.
quarter life crisis as well, so 25.
Exactly. I'm like, what am I
What am I
gonna
gonna do with my
do?
life?
This is bad. And,
Yeah.
I was really happy because I got like a contractor gig writing job descriptions for Palantir. I was like, my big break.
Yeah.
And so I was, sitting around feeling sorry for myself. And my best friend, who's now the associate dean at Northwestern Law School, was like,
Oh,
Ellen, you
wow.
got to get out of here. You got to come to this party. Like, Michael's having this hot tub party. And I was like, I Michael's the last person I would ever want to go to a party with hot tub in the name. Like, I'm not gonna do this. I'm not someone who like goes to parties. And he was
Yeah.
like, come on, please, you gotta get out, please, please, please. And I look back at like how consequential that decision was of like, oh, fine, all right, I'll go. And so I did not go near any kind of hot tub related activity, but I just sat in the guy's living room, and there was a public defender who was there, and she was telling me all these funny stories about her clients. And I was just laughing and laughing. And I was like, you know what? I should take the LSAT.
Yeah, I don't know what else I'm gonna do. I should just
Like,
do it.
I should just take, I've always liked tests. I could do
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could do it. And I literally bought some LSAT prep books on my phone at the party. I was like, this is going to be my new trajectory.
Yeah.
And so then it was like I so desperately wanted a project to like
Mhm.
go toward that as soon as I, got into LSAT land, I just fell in love with it. It was such a relief. It made me feel like just intellectually awake in a way I had never felt. It was like finally there was a thing that was hard enough that I could
Mhm.
never gist it. I could never half pay attention. I had to give it everything that I had. And it was so perfect and rewarding in how it would engage back. And I was just like, well, this is great. And that was a great 2.5 months. And then, got a great score and was like, all right, I guess I have to apply to law school.
'Cause I did this very hard test,
Because
and I
I got a
loved
good
it.
score, and there was that funny story. So I guess this is a career for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Just a great way to just find out your next career in general.
exactly. Listen to a funny story at a party.
Yeah.
And so the best school I got into was Harvard, and I deferred 3 times before finally saying no, but that first deferral was definitely the most impactful. And I look back at I had a friend who was a 3L at Harvard at the time. He was a third-year law student, and he was like, "Ellen, just make me one promise. If there's any other thing you could ever see yourself doing, just try and do that before you come here."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Well, why?" He's like, "'Cause I know you, and I know this is not the place for you." And
What a good
I
friend.
I know, and I
Because I
haven't
think a
talked to him
lot of
since.
people would hesitate to share that.
Really?
Yeah, just, like, not wanting to,
Yeah.
um, be the person responsible for influencing your trajectory in case you regret it or it's not the right
Yeah.
call. Also, a lot of folks may not be the best people to be making suggested advice like that, but in this
Oh,
case,
yeah.
it sounds like it was spot on. This person
I need to
actually did
thank
know
him.
you.
I've never thanked him. I really need to do that. But no, wonderful, wonderful friend. And so then after that first deferral, I was like, yeah, I can just wait a year. Well, who cares? And I taught my first LSAT class, and then I really got hooked on the bug because as
Mhm,
much as I liked the LSAT as like Ellen in theater
mhm,
doing it, I found a much, much greater challenge, which is, the black box of how someone else is
mhm.
thinking through any of these operations, and how much more difficult that is to refine, debug, systematize, of like controlling the way someone else thinks and refining their thinking, training their thinking to be able to emulate the
Yeah,
thing that I was doing so naturally. Um,
yeah.
and so
And
I
they
spent
say you really do know how to do something if you can teach it.
Yeah, I mean, it took me 6 years to write The Loophole, which is the book that kind of gave me this LSAT company. And
Mhm,
for those 6 years between, say, 2012 and 2018, I was just working with students, refining the methodology, testing things, learning from students, seeing what they could and couldn't do, and remaking a system just
mhm.
from the ground up. And it was like I was in like a laboratory getting my own little LSAT PhD, ready to put out my
Yeah,
dissertation.
pretty much.
Which I look back at those like good old days now. It's like, oh, I have a lot of
Yeah,
nostalgia for
yeah.
those days of the loophole.
So then, in those days, were you thinking, "Oh, I'm going to convert this into a book. I'm gonna convert this into a company," or were you just, like,
Oh,
passionate about what you were doing?
it was, always wanted to make a book,
Okay.
and like that was kind of the goal. But I had to have like methodologies to be able
Mhm,
to do that. And so the loophole took a lot of, you know, try something, see if it works. Okay, it doesn't. Okay, change this little thing. Okay, now try it. And oh, this worked. All right, now port it to 5 people. Okay, now port it to 20 people. Okay,
Mhm.
now it didn't work. And, and all of that process. And so once those processes were actually set in stone, which now is, something called translation, something called the clear is what became into the loophole. Then getting it into a refined paper form in a form that, could be sold was another another
Mhm.
big journey. Especially when like I was, some random girl in Palo Alto who had no freaking idea how to start a business or anything like that. Like I often feel like, the redheaded stepchild of Hampton in a way that, I was not like, and I'm gonna make it in
Right.
entrepreneurship. I'm a business
Yeah,
person.
I can see the future.
Exactly. That it's
It's
like,
gonna
no,
happen.
I'm just very, very into this exact problem. And I
Mhm.
believe that I am uniquely suited and uniquely passionate to solve this problem for real people. And
Yeah.
I will find a way to do that.
And in so many ways, that is the best entrepreneur. The one
Great.
that's just focused on no, but truly focused on the problem. What is the problem? Solving the problem, obsessed about the problem, and has a unique take on approaching that problem. So wanted to build the loophole. How were you sustaining yourself in those 6 years? Just from the income from teaching? Did you have
Yeah.
other jobs? Yeah,
No.
teaching.
Yeah, all teaching. And so I have always been put in a lot of free hours type of
Mm-hmm.
person. I mentioned my mentor Dave. I did
Mm-hmm.
work for his company for a couple of years
Mm-hmm.
in that time period.
Mm-hmm.
And taught students through that, but then I would also source my own students through just referrals and stuff of people I knew outside. And but every 2-hour session was really like a 3 or 4-hour session that,
Yeah.
people would, come over to my house, and I always said I never traveled. Everyone had to come to me because I had to be able to
Yeah.
put people back to back to back.
Yeah.
And like it was like these people were just my muses, my best friends, and they are what the loophole is built on. Like when I
Mhm.
look at any of the methodologies in the loophole, I think of Mira, I think of Brittany, I think of Jessica, I think of Sina, of all of those people who were so trusting of me, even though I was some random girl in Palo Alto with a picnic table in her living room. That they believed in me before anybody else did, and they were willing to do whatever thing I came up with to
To
just
learn.
see. And like I know now that that kind of trust is very, very difficult to find. And so
Mhm.
I'm very
Mhm.
grateful to them.
And I'm sure they're grateful to you too, Ellen,
Yeah.
because I'm sure you got to help them tons. So
I mean,
how
they went to
did
good law schools.
exactly. How did then elemental prep, how did you get it started? Tell and just for the context of other wannabe entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs and just getting a sense of your experience share. What was that initial period like? And
Yeah.
then I want to talk about how you scaled to 100K MRR, which is fascinating and inspiring.
Yeah. So I've always been a kind of like, get on the road before the car even has wheels
Mhm.
sort of person. Um which is good and bad. But I was very focused on writing the loophole and making
Okay.
this kind of genre defining work. And I think at my heart, I am, a creative and an empathetic person. I very much was like focused on I need the loophole to be better than every single thing on the market in every possible way, in as objective of a sense as possibly can be. And
Yeah.
I always said, like, I prostrate at the altar of the book. The book doesn't work for me. I work for the book. And so, in
Yeah.
terms of like how Elemental was started, it really was just a company to wrap around the loophole. Um, and so, when the loophole took also a year to get designed and laid out and in design, that's a whole other story
That's a whole we have to do a whole other podcast on writing a book
on the
to cover that.
designing of the loophole. That
Design.
so as it got closer and closer to the loophole is going to come out, it's like, okay, now I need an entity. When
Mhm.
really, you could say Elemental
Right,
started
makes
in
sense.
2012. Like
Yeah.
that wouldn't be super wrong, but the actual business entity that started was in 2018, and it accompanied the release of the loophole because okay, now all of a sudden, I'm going to have an entity to take in money from Amazon and from
Mhm.
Shopify and all this stuff. And like the big launch plan I'm like, go from nobody to somebody in this industry was literally, I made myself a promise. I was like, okay, until the manuscript is submitted, you're not allowed to have a public presence because that would be like rewarding for yourself for something you haven't done and haven't
Yeah.
proved. And
Yeah.
so then after I submitted the loophole, I, made my Elemental Ellen Reddit handle. And I was like, all
Mm.
right, the future begins today. And I would go on Reddit and look at people's like for help posts in RLSAT. And I was always really careful. I didn't want to look like I was marketing because I
Yeah.
didn't want to market. Like I did want to help these people genuinely. And so but people never give you enough information in those public posts to
Right.
actually help them. And so I would be like, oh, hey, I want to help you, but I'm going to chat you now so you can give me more information. And so I would stay up until like 3 a.m. every night between like October and December, just chatting these strangers on Reddit about their LSAT problems
Wow.
and
Yeah.
giving them advice and trying to solve it. And I was very like gentle about like ever mentioning anything about the loophole or anything I did.
Mhm.
People would have to ask me. And then on Christmas Eve 2018, this guy wrote this very long post that actually gave a lot of information that you really could engage with it and actually fix the guy's problems. And so
Mm.
I was like, you know what? I'll actually write a long public post this time and go through and actually tell him stuff that could work. And was like, I'm going to take a chance. I'll mention a few things from the loophole just because, it's in the middle of a big help post. Like people will see I'm not just like being a scammer. Like
Right.
I'm hoping I don't get attacked.
Yeah.
And I actually met with him and gave him free tutoring on Christmas Eve night. And it was this great thing and
Wow.
wonderful for us. A girl in Florida saw this comment on Christmas Eve and was like, what's the clear? Googled it, found out what the loophole was, bought the loophole, read it in the days between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. And then on New Year's Day 2019, made this big Reddit post about how great the loophole is and how it, gave her, I don't know, 6 points or something in a week. And that post then blew up. And from then on, Elemental Prep has self propelled. And
Wow.
it was just a word of mouth, like, explosion, and of course, Reddit is a cruel mistress, but
Yes.
you have to, treat it gingerly, but from then on, it really just the Reddit community got a hold of it, and I was accused of, AstroTurf marketing and all the stuff that was not
Mhm.
true at all,
Yeah.
but it was that
Yeah.
it got too popular too fast that people, like,
Mhm.
couldn't believe it in a way.
Well, that's an attestation to how useful it was with Reddit. It's such a delicate organism to be with. And I love hearing you staying up most nights, October through December. And then having this one, it's like you're spreading your luck surface area there because then
Yeah,
you had this one person who did have a public post that you could post about, and then this
yeah,
woman who bought it, and it's wild,
yeah.
crazy. Okay, so then how is or so that then brought attention to Loophole, which brought attention to Elemental Prep, and then you kind of started having a wait list and needed to build more systems around that.
Yes, yes. So, as you can imagine, the girl who stays up really late on Reddit responding to posts and things is not exactly the person with like an ops team. Like that was when like all of a sudden I think I got thrown into the deep end of the
A
pool
business.
of business and no freaking clue, what to do at all. I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh gosh, do I need to like have an assistant? I probably need an
Yeah.
assistant. How do you get an assistant?"
How do you do all this stuff in 24 hours? Oh shoot, I probably need another person to help me with the
Exactly,
ops.
exactly. Exactly. And so, I definitely learned by fire, made a
Mhm.
million mistakes, and have
Yeah.
spent since January 2019 until now essentially learning how and building the structures around
Yep.
the demand.
Yep.
Because I have always, like, in the history of Elemental, since that day in January 2019, had more demands than I could handle.
Could. Yeah.
And it's always been a very fraught emotional situation for me
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
love the students so
Help
much.
them.
I really, I genuinely care about them a lot. And I don't like that I don't have all of the structures to serve them in the ways that I want to serve them. But of course, getting all of those structures in place, it takes man hours or woman
Mhm.
hours. And it's hard. There isn't a manual on how to, do payment processing with people in
Yeah.
China, or how to like set up a calendar that like, is my
Yeah.
calendar, which is super complicated. And so I made, some good decisions throughout that time that definitely did get me to where I am today. But I always think Elemental is a living organism that's always growing, always changing, always getting better. And that's one of the things I love the most
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. And this is interesting what you're bringing up, Ellen. And I just want to call it out because I see this often with founders, maybe who are not from non traditional backgrounds. So, like, not coming from having seen a ton of entrepreneurs or a ton of like wealth management, financial management, things like that. Is that I see that, and I would put myself in this category, that we tend to hesitate longer than necessary to make these investments in the business. So to maybe hire an executive assistant or someone in biz ops, which we were talking about last night, and kind of taking advantage of that to leverage, to be a source of leverage for the business and growth of the business. And I just want to call that out for listeners and to say that that's also normal psychology. Like, you're trying to save money, and sometimes it is worthwhile to make the investment to grow your business further, which sounds like what you were learning there. I know
Yeah.
you have some systems, right? Like, you're building AI, Ellen. You
Hoping
have
to build. If there's anyone
your
listening to this podcast,
talk to Ellen.
talk to me, because I want to partner with another company who can do the actual building. But my dream is to
Mhm.
do a tiered subscription platform that lowest level is feeding the loophole into an AILN, and AILN walks you through it, answers questions, can make novel drills with you and all of that sort of thing just based on loophole content. Then next tier, using all my online content, I have you know, the thing I mentioned called the clear, it's something I made up. Now there's an answer key with 4,500 something answers in it for every question, using
Mhm.
that as like the next tier and some of my other online content. And then on top of that, I have over 4,000 sessions of structured data tutoring notes that I take in Airtable that I'm imagining the highest tier will use that data to really provide tutoring in a box as much as possible. And so that's the hope for the future. I've been scoping out partners of who I might want to work with to make this a real thing. But in terms of how to scale tutoring, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifics of partners that you want to reach out to you are
Oh, I mean, anyone who has, an AI subscription platform that can do what I just said,
okay.
that can house this sort of content, house, a PDF version of the loophole that can't be scraped and taken down
Yeah.
and pirated and all that, and can provide that AI version of Ellen, and can do a lot of the legwork
Yeah. Yeah.
for, of course, a fee of some kind, but that I want someone who's going to be a very
Mm.
active partner, because I know there would be demand for this. It's just a matter of, with my schedule and all of the help that I provide, finding the bandwidth to really make that happen.
Of course. Of
Yeah.
course. And then tell us, Ellen, how you got to 100K MRR as a solo founder with so much bandwidth stretching. Have you been divvying up your product? Are there like different techniques, tactics, strategies that worked for you? Or is it plain brute force hours and getting them in, and any advice for folks
Yeah. So I mean,
that are
how I did
solopreneurs?
it, you heard the first part of the story. And so,
Yep.
that is how I was discovered and how the demand has swelled. But in terms of maybe some strategies that I used that I wasn't aware I was using, but I think were very good strategies now,
That
is
you
I
stumbled onto.
invented a lot of methodologies in the loophole that had specific names. So like I said, like translation is just me. I'm the only one who teaches translation. I'm the only one who teaches the clear. I invented the clear. And, if you want help with the clear because you read the loophole, well, you've got one choice. There isn't really anyone else who can teach that. That I will, always have primacy over that. And, there may be like random people who just got a 172 who are like, and I can teach the clear, but like, I don't think anybody really thinks there's a major competition there. And so if you're somebody who wants that, well, it's a market of one. And I think everyone should strive to create
Mhm.
markets of one. And especially in crowded industries where it's like, okay, I'm a coach and what I do is provide
Mhm.
coaching. And it's like, okay, well,
What's
that's
your
nice. And I'm sure you're a very
differentiator?
good coach, just like I'm a good LSAT tutor, but it doesn't really provide a strong differentiation. And so
Mhm.
I think that all of my demand that, I'm very, very lucky to have is based on, first off, I think the authenticity that people can see I approach this problem with. Like
Mhm.
I think, known as the most passionate person in the world about the LSAT. And, it's like being the nicest guy in poker. It's not that hard to
Yeah.
be the most passionate person in the world about the LSAT. But um, that authenticity, but then also the market of one effect,
Mhm.
that the Loophole is at a very accessible price point and it lays out all of these methodologies. And it's also a complete solution for someone who wants to self study. So it's not like some kind of, quick and easy ebook that's like 8 pages and people call it a book. Like
Mhm.
it's an actual product with a system in it that someone could use on their own. And so that introductory product, like I call the Loophole just profitable marketing. I'm never really very concerned with how much money the Loophole makes. Like the Loophole is, in the black, but I don't think it's that in the black. I keep the price very purposefully low. It's like maybe close to half the price of a lot of the other top
Books.
LSAT prep books. And it's because I'm not trying to make money off the Loophole.
Mhm.
I more just want to help people. I want it to be an accessible solution because I know how expensive my tutoring and my other stuff is. And so
Mhm.
if somebody can, get the Loophole, that can be enough.
Awesome. Right.
Um,
That's your
but
contribution to everyone else who can't afford your
everything else, yeah,
teaching.
exactly, exactly. And so in terms of how that revenue comes in, though, I think another smart thing was I have very strictly defined structures on how I will do tutoring. Um, that everyone has to have a 2-hour recurring slot every week at the exact same time. And I think not giving students a lot of flexibility,
Mhm.
it's good and it's bad, but I think that flexibility often can, sabotage both parties because sure it's great for me in that I have a predictable stream of my work, but also I think it serves the student much better to have that rigid structure of checking in. Even just the other day, because now I've, a 25-person wait list again,
Mhm.
and 24 people on the calendar. What are you going to do, Ellen? But just the other day, like 2 days ago, someone said, oh, Ellen, but don't you think we could go to every other week? And
Mm.
and two people could share a slot. And this is someone who was talking to me about working on my calendar. It was someone within Elemental, and I was like, no, even though it would benefit me because
Mhm.
I would get through the wait list faster. People would be less mad at me. People with higher rates would get on the calendar faster. All of those things that like I have every incentive to do that to allow people to switch off weeks. I won't
Mhm.
do it because I know the results will be worse.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to sabotage a student's success all so
Right.
that I can deal with my waitlist problem?
Right. Right. Because again, the measure of your business is the quality of the tutoring and those results. And so sacrificing that just shoots you in the foot down the line. Super smart. I also like the same time slot too, because then once one person's done, you have this time slot. You can offer that to people on the wait list and see who's
It,
available. I think that's really interesting.
exactly.
Ellen, how speaking of all your tutoring, as we're gonna wrap up soon, how do you have a brief version on how we can teach folks to be a top 1% reader? Any top things to think about? We're having a kid at the end of March. Is there anything I can start doing with that kiddo sooner? Um,
Ooh. So brief tips. I think speaking in for a little one, speaking
mhm,
in complete sentences as much as
mhm,
possible and using adult words. Don't speak to them like a kid. Like speak to them like an adult. Because like little minds are just they're mimic machines. And so if they
yeah,
have things to mimic that use, more advanced words, more advanced sentence structures, that's only going to serve them well in the future.
yeah,
Um, I mean, I have like radical beliefs about like children's media. So
mhm,
that I think, giving kids classic literature, like,
mhm,
Jane Eyre, Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, stuff like that, when they're too young to really get it, just acclimates them to complex structures, complex words, creates a curiosity much earlier. That's what I personally had in my life is like I didn't watch any commercial TV until I was like way, way older at all.
Mhm.
And I I would like memorize The Wizard of Oz, watching The Wizard of Oz over and over again. I didn't have access to a lot of contemporary anything. It was
Right.
almost like I was raised in kind of a like a time warp a little bit, that I was reading classic books and watching classic TV, that sort of thing, and I do think that that did make me much, much more acclimated to, complex sentences and complex vocabulary from a young age, and created a sense of, like, less fear surrounding
Mhm.
those sorts of words, and so that's one thing as just a basis, but then also ingraining the habit of translation and quipping from a young age, which is very, very easy. That essentially all you have to do is when a kid reads something, have them read it out loud and have them intone it. Like I always say,
Mm.
I'm 20% cartoon character in how I talk, that it's very exaggerated, that you want to like experiencing challenges or mental blocks you faced and overcome. Like I just read a line of the email
Yeah.
that having that go up and down because that song
Yeah.
is hardwired to be retained, of like when they read out loud, making them like feel it, like because emotions
Mm.
are the thing most linked to memory. And then after they've read it like that, have them close their eyes and they have to tell you what it said in their own words, not the exact words.
Mm.
Then they have to say something about it. And it could be a little
Mm.
joke, a reaction, something from their life, or asking you a question, what you think about that. And when that happens and they get used to doing that on every chunk of text they interact with, they'll
It
be
becomes
active critical thinkers in no time. And it starts to become very fast, very ingrained, happens in your head without you even realizing it.
that makes so much sense. It becomes like system 1 as opposed to system 2 where for me at least that sounds like it's not system 1 for me. What you just described, the full engagement, like the quipping on it and then the okay, what would you think about this for everything I read? And what a great tip. So I feel like I could also just start practicing that myself.
Yeah, no, I wanna do it, and I'm, experiencing now more interest of, people who wanna learn this outside the LSAT, and it's, like, such a
Mhm.
gift, it's so exciting, and so it's something I definitely wanna get more into in the
Yeah.
future, is
Yeah.
teaching this process to, like, business leaders, and so, hey, if you're listening and you're a business leader and you wanna learn,
Yeah. Find
reach
Ellen.
out.
I'm excited for your session on this in a few months as well. My goodness, Ellen, this was so fun. We didn't get to cover everything we wanted to, but I'm not surprised at all. We'll have to have you on again.
Of course,
Uh,
I'm a chatty one. I
but
know
that's
I go on
great.
too long.
That was awesome. All right, y'all. We're going to wrap up the pod here today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like what you hear, leave a review and share.